Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining the webinar. My name is Chris Stevens. I'm the head of the mining department of Worksmans. And the focus of today's webinar is new trends in mining across Africa. And it's more or less a follow on from the mining in Durban that was held down in Cape Town in February. It had specific themes that mining in Durban, including all the new buzzwords in the industry such as ESG, alternative forms of energy, alternative forms of power, battery minerals, environmental protection, illegal mining. These are all the topics that are currently trendy, let's say, in all mining jurisdictions right through Africa, probably across the world as well, but especially in Africa, especially with all of our community issues and environmental issues that we experience in mining in Africa. So the purpose of today was really to have a few countries that were represented at the Mining in Durban, just to give their thoughts as to some of these topics, the latest trends in mining legislation, latest trends in the mining industry within various jurisdictions that were represented at the Mining in Durban. So I'll give you a brief introduction to LEX Africa. LEX Africa is an alliance of law firms that across Africa. We have 30 member countries. It's an association, let's call it, or an alliance of law firms. Formed in 1993, and it's the first and largest Pan-African legal alliance. And I think, interestingly enough, we are ranked band 1 on Chambers as an alliance network for Africa. So it's very successfully run and administered by Worksmans effectively, but there's great participation from all the other firms. We have AGMs and marketing initiatives. And it's an alliance which is, as I said, established since 1993, so it's been going for a long time and it is well established. Today we've got represented on the webinar 6 mining jurisdictions, which are all obviously good mining jurisdictions with fairly established mining infrastructure, mining development, mining legislation. So we've got Zambia, Mali, Ghana, DRC, Tanzania, and of course South Africa. So all of the speakers today are well-renowned and specialists in their field, well-known in their jurisdictions, and are all expert mining lawyers, so they're well-versed in being able to talk about the topics we're going to raise today. And you'll be hearing from all of them, so I don't need to do much more of an introduction. We're going to look at various topics. We're going to look at ESG and sustainability. That's obviously an important thing. I think everybody knows what ESG is. It's a big buzzword, and financiers of mining projects, for example, are extremely interested in ESG and sustainability of projects. The ability to get financing is dependent upon one's ability to satisfy the bank's requirements in that regard, for example. Then we're going to look at the topic of minerals of the future. I think everybody's also aware now that these new, let's call them battery minerals, are flavor of the month. I think mining is no longer just about deep level gold mining and platinum mining and coal mining, which was always traditionally the main sources of the main minerals involved in any mining project. I think things like copper and lithium and the rare earths elements have become far more topical, far more interest from an exploration point of view in regard to these minerals, and we'll be touching on that as well. Then the topic of mineral beneficiation. I think obviously each country grapples with this topic of mineral beneficiation, and I think we'll be talking to all of the countries who are represented on the webinar in regard to their experiences and current trends in regard to mineral beneficiation within their country. It's a topic that South Africa is also grappling with. Then we're going to look at water resources. I think everybody knows that water is becoming a scarcer commodity, global warming and various other issues. So every mining operation uses water resources, so water and mining are inextricably linked. We're then going to look at two specific questions that we're going to pose of two of the countries represented, DRC and Zambia, in regard to various aspects relating to their mining code and their attraction for foreign investment. And then the last topic we're going to look at, if we have time at the end, which hopefully we will be illegal mining. And I think that's obviously a very topical in South Africa. We are blessed, unfortunately, with a massive illegal mining problem at the moment, especially in regard to abandoned gold mines and abandoned coal mines. But I think the other countries represented here have similar issues, maybe on a smaller scale, but still there. So without much ado, I'm going to hand over to Artie Joro, who's a partner with me in the mining law team at Worksmans. She was also at the mining Indaba. She's going to introduce each one of these questions and then ask specific countries to answer those specific questions to the extent that they relate to their jurisdiction. Just as a point of explanation, we won't ask every country every question, otherwise we'll be here for the next 5 hours. So we do have time limits, so we'll restrict certain of the questions to certain of the countries. And please feel free if you have any questions perhaps at the end of each topic. So if we get to the end of, let's say, the first topic, which is ESG, if you have any particular questions you might want to fire away at any one of the panelists, including South Africans, please feel free to do so. And one last introductory point, just to note that we have produced a mining guide, LEX Africa mining guide, which is available on the website, the LEX Africa website, where we've asked a list of questions, about 30 or so questions about various topics in the mining industry, covering all aspects such as environmental issues, royalties, legislation, water issues, and each country, not every country, but almost all of the countries in LEX Africa have actually responded, and we've put that all into a mining guide. So you can do a comparative analysis between various countries by looking at the answers to their questions. So that's quite a useful publication to have access to. It's on our website. All right, without much ado, I'm going to hand over to Artie, who's going to introduce the questions, and we'll take it from there. Thanks, Artie.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And thank you all for attending this webinar. So the first question is around ESG. So at the mining Indaba last year, the South African Minister of Mineral Resources and Energy noted that there's a renewed focus on sustainability by the global investment community. It is estimated that exceeding 50 trillion US dollars will be invested in ESG assets. ESG meaning environmental, social, governance assets. This is a third of the projected global assets under management, which is over 140.5 trillion US dollars. So it's quite a significant investment that we are looking to see in ESG assets. So with that in mind, we pose to Zambia, Mali, and Ghana and the DRC the following question. How has your jurisdiction reacted to the renewed global focus on sustainability by the investment community, which is driving the development of ESG assets? In particular, is your country a signatory to the Kyoto Protocol, as well as the Paris Agreement? And what domestic legislation has been enacted in order to comply with your country's commitments made under these international treaties? Over to you. We will start with Zambia.
Oh, Charles. Hello, Charles.
Charles, you are muted.
Hello, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. Sorry about that. So, thank you, Ati, and good morning, everyone. From the ESG perspective, where these are standing from our jurisdiction here in Zambia, we don't have a specific or comprehensive ESG code, but ESG has been trending in the recent past, and we have evidence of it in various statutes. And most specifically, we have corporate law, which places certain duties on directors of companies, including companies for mining companies. We also have employment legislation that places certain ESG expectations or obligations on companies generally, including mining companies, such as provision of adequate and decent housing or payment of housing allowance. Then we've got the Mines Act itself that places certain obligations on mining companies, such as preference, for local products or services, and also creating a standard in terms of how the environment is protected by the mining companies, and perhaps more importantly, the extent of liability caused by mining activities. So in a nutshell, ESG is definitely something that has become a lot more pronounced in Zambia. And we are even signatories to the EITI, that's Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, which obligates mining companies to disclose, how much tax they're paying as an aspect of ESG. So from that perspective, we do have aspects of ESG existing, through the various legislative framework and policy frameworks. Now, in terms of activism, we are starting to see a lot of push towards requiring mining companies to be accountable. Recently, we had the case where one big mining company owned by Vedanta, known as Konkola Copper Mines, sued. It was sued outside Zambia, in the UK, but the impact of the judgment was actually on the Zambian operation. And in that case, the UK court held that the holding companies will be, still held responsible for environmental damage, even if it's happening outside the UK jurisdiction, but according to the UK or global standard. So from that perspective, I think it's triggered a few more cases that are Zambia specific and sort of based on ESG. In terms of compliance or assets that are ESG compliant in Zambia, most of the large-scale mining is mainly initiated and operated by Western-based companies that are already following the ESG compliance regime. So we don't have much of an issue in terms of compliance here in Zambia because of that perspective. But we do also have smaller, medium scale operators that are not as compliant. And we also have mainly, Asian-owned mining companies that, get in there in terms of being compliant with the ESG standards, but perhaps not as compliant as the Western-owned companies. So if I can stop there and perhaps allow the other countries to also make a presentation, and I'll be happy to take questions or add more clarity to that submission. Thank you.
Thank you, Charles, for that contribution. We will hand over to Mali.
Okay, thank you, Ati. Yeah, like in Mali also, ESG has been really trendy these last years. And since 2019, we have a new mining code. And since that mining code, Mali has placed a greater emphasis on the environment and community development than the previous mining codes. And just like Charles was saying, we have also all these mining companies, which are global companies, having also their own ESG policies. So it's a mix now of all these questions. We have with the new mining code, environmental protection and local community development, which are really included in all the mining phases. So since the beginning, since the exploration phase, like the mining companies have to comply with some environmental provisions. And in the new mining code, for example, also we have introduced a new fund dedicated to the local development. And that fund is contributed with 20% of all the mining revenues given by the government, and also 0.5% of the turnover of the mining companies. So that fund is supposed to be reallocated to the development of the local communities around the mining sites. In addition, for the governance of the mining companies, it's of paramount importance to the Malian state. For example, any companies must take a particular form, and also any change in the governance must be reported to the state under penalty. Also, Mali is a signatory of the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. So we have the two implementation law for the ratification of the Kyoto Protocol, and also from the Paris Agreement.
Thank you, Mali. We will head over to Ghana.
Thank you. For Ghana, we also don't have a comprehensive ESG law or reporting requirement, but you'll find traces of it in various legislations. For example, our mining code, our Companies Act, which is a new Companies Act that was passed in 2019, provides extensive corporate governance reporting requirement for companies. And then we also have our labor laws that provide extensive employee relationships and responsibilities of taking care of employees. And then we also have our environmental law, which provides for environmental protection and prevention of pollution to the environment, and requires mining companies to provide annual environmental management reports on what they've been up to and whether or not they've been compliant with their reporting obligations. Ghana is also a signatory to the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. And at the heart of the Paris Agreement is the nationally determined contributions, which is basically the embodiment of efforts that all countries are supposed to make to reduce the greenhouse gases, and then the efforts that they are trying to make to adapt to climate change. Ghana in its efforts to comply with the Paris Agreement and comply with the requirements of Article 4 in 2021, has submitted an updated nationally determined principle, nationally determined contribution. And Ghana is hoping that the update will help it reduce the impact of climate change on the economy and help develop the economy sustainably. The Ministry of Environment and Science and Technology is responsible for coordinating the updates and of the nationally determined principles. And we have the Environmental Protection Agency, which is responsible for tracking the reporting requirements that Ghana has stated in its NDCs. We also have recently set up a carbon registry, which is to help with compliance with Article 6, which requires reduction of carbon emissions. So the carbon registry, it's basically going to help Ghana to be able to quantify any greenhouse gas emissions for projects and also monitor this project and how they're actually reducing emissions, and then issuing carbon credits, related projects with carbon credits, and also establishing a market for being able to trade carbon credits and promote financing of projects related to carbon trading.
Thank you very much for that. We will hand over to the DRC.
Well, thank you. As far as ESG is concerned, I would not say it's trending, but I would say something is happening. That there is awareness, more and more awareness on the ESG issue, both on the government side and on the side of the industry. On the government side, it's because DRC has a huge potential in terms of environmental issues. DRC has been positioning itself as a solution country, as the president has said. And because of that, they made some commitments during the pre-COP27. But like for the other jurisdictions, we do not have a comprehensive legislation yet on this issue. You will find provisions across several laws which are relevant, but we do not have a specific and comprehensive legislation. So I said something is happening because in the industry, there's more and more discussion around the issue, ESG matters. There have been conferences, NGOs are pushing for people to realize both the risks and the opportunities as regards ESG, because those issues are driven from outside. And DRC has a big stake in the supply chain of most of the major producers or markets in terms of mining, and because of this particular position of DRC as a mining jurisdiction, there's a lot of risks and a lot of opportunities regarding ESG, and because of that, there have been conferences, there have been discussions, both within the industry and between the industry and the government, to deal with these ESG matters and how to seize the opportunities available. But it has not yet become trending because it's still starting. The process is still starting. We are at a phase where people are raising awareness. But in our legislation, you will find several provisions which are relevant to the ESG issues. First, DRC is signed the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. And in the mining code itself, there's a lot of provisions regarding environmental protection, regarding social impact of projects, regarding protection of local population, Several obligations apply to license holders, both at the beginning, during operation, during production phase, and during when closing mines, etc. So there are, in addition to the mining code, there's a particular law on an environment. There's an environment legislation specific, which contains also several obligations which apply also to the mining sector. The labor code has a small number of provisions which would be relevant to ESG. The corporate code, the corporate law, not so much. But when you put all those provisions together, you could have both a body of obligations and requirements applicable to the mining industry in terms of ESG. But when you look at it, the way it's being discussed now, it's not yet trending, and we are yet to, the government has made commitments to improve the legislation to address all the aspects of those ESG matters. That's what I can say for TRC.
Thank you for that, Patty. I will hand over to Chris to just also give a bit of insight on the South African position.
Yes, well, South Africa's, obviously ESG is a big issue, especially for the financing of projects. I think that's where mining industries find the most impactful aspect of ESG. Obviously, we've got a massive coal mining industry, and there's a move away from coal, which is fairly obvious for various reasons, and therefore the ability to raise finance through the South African banks for coal projects is extremely difficult. Many of the major banks in South Africa have stopped funding these, for example, because of the ESG requirements in relation to coal mining. So, in regards to legislation, I'll also ask Artie to put her word in, but as far as I'm aware, there's not much in the way of specific legislation dealing with ESG. We have very onerous environmental legislation. Separately, we've got a separate Environmental Act, which works sort of hand in hand with the main Mining Act, but it's probably one of the most onerous in the world, almost from an environmental protection point of view. So we do take environmental protection very seriously in South Africa in the mining industry. Of course, obviously that is impacted by all the illegal miners that we have, who obviously don't have any regard for the environment. So although most of the mining companies are adopting first world standards and very onerous legal requirements in regard to environmental protection, including fully funded for partial or early closure of a mine, you have to be fully funded. You have to have annual reporting requirements. You get audited. You get beaten over the head by the department if you're in breach of any of the provisions of your environmental management program. So it's a strange mixture in South Africa where, from a legislative point of view, it's very advanced, but from a practical point of view, not so advanced, because we do have these illegal mining operations in many of the abandoned coal and gold mines. From a social point of view, also the Mining Act in South Africa, achieves that by virtue of what's called social labor plans that each mine has to have in place to deal with the upliftment of communities regarding mines. So once again, South Africa, from a legislative point of view, is probably very advanced in world terms in dealing with social aspects. Once again, if you don't comply, the ministry can take away your mining right, and you probably find that the most instances in South Africa where the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy has actually tried to cancel licenses to mine have been where mining companies haven't complied with their social obligations set out in their social labor plans. So the government takes that very seriously. And then governance, well, I think, once again, we have a very sophisticated governance regime. in South Africa, the Companies Act is very stringent upon regulation of companies. So I think our legislation in South Africa deals with ESG to a large extent. But I'll ask Artie just to talk about the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement.
I'm happy to do so. So we currently have the climate change bill that is currently before the South African Parliament. And the climate change bill, it tackles a number of issues, especially flowing from South Africa's international commitments under the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. So, and then in 22 May 2019, the South African Parliament enacted the Carbon Tax Act, which identifies specific sectors whose activities result in greenhouse gas emissions and imposes this carbon tax that is for the benefit of the National Revenue Fund. So that is the legislation that we've seen recently come as a result of South Africa being a signatory to these international treaties. But there's a current buzzword in South Africa right now, and I suppose globally as well. This idea of just transition. And the media has reported quite extensively on this, the move of South Africa from being a coal-fired electricity generation country towards renewable energy and more renewable sources such as solar, wind, as well as hydro plants. So that's the current buzzword right now. But the concern is that, what then happens to the coal industry? What happens to whole towns that operate around coal mines? What happens to the economic activities in those towns, the job creations in those towns? And I should also mention that we are currently experiencing an energy crisis. So we have issues, such as load shedding. So there is this need for the country to address its energy mix, especially baseload energy. And currently our baseload energy has been primarily from coal-fired power stations, which are reliant on the coal industry. So those are current, discussions that are happening in the country around, the international commitments, just transition, and what the impact will be on the South African coal industry. I don't know if we have any questions or comments from the floor around this topic of ESG before we move on to the next topic. Okay, thank you.
I would just like to add that in the case of Ghana, the stock exchange has actually recently, sometime last year, come up with an ESG reporting code for listed companies, so that if it provides the details of how listed companies would be guided in making ESG reporting, the type of things that they should be reporting about. So, which is very helpful because it guides and it provides detailed regulation, detailed guidance on how they should do their reporting. And it also provides the opportunity for other companies that are not listed to use those guidelines in their ESG reporting for the financing that requires such a report.
Thank you very much for that contribution, Sarah. We will move on to the next topic, which is minerals of the future. So we have, Chris mentioned briefly that there's this new interest in minerals such as lithium, copper, rare earths, as well as nickel. Interestingly, South Africa recently published a strategy document that looks into exploration of these new minerals. They've been tagged minerals for industries of the future. In addition to that strategy document, there was also an implementation plan. But essentially, the Department of Mineral Resources is now trying to put in place measures to ensure, that there is much exploration that is being undertaken in the country, particularly in respect of these minerals. And the idea is to also provide easy access to entrants or new, investors as well as new entrants into the mining industry who are looking to invest or explore these particular minerals. So to Ghana, Syrian will pose the question to you again. What has your country's response been to the discovery of these new minerals, which provide a solid base for industries of the future? These minerals, I'll mention them again, it's lithium, it's copper, it's rare earths, as well as nickel. And then more importantly, how can your jurisdiction better position itself to fully explore and exploit these minerals? Over to you.
In Ghana, we have discovered some of these new minerals, especially lithium. And although there isn't any specific legislation right now that is directed at these new minerals, we are still using our current mining laws, which is extensive enough to cover the requirements for these new minerals. So the government is basically pushing to make sure that the discovery by Atlantic Lithium, it starts production in 2024. And the government is assisting them in every way possible to make sure that they get the necessary guidance in applying for the mining lease to enable them start with the exploration activity. Also, Ghana has set up a minerals income investment fund, which is basically the object of the minerals income investment fund is to take Ghana's equity income from mining interest, from its carried interest that it holds in various mining companies. And then the royalty revenues that it holds, it's going to be managed by the minerals income investment fund. And this gives the country the ability to use that revenue to invest in these new minerals and other mining assets. And the hope of the Minerals Income Investment Fund is that it will actually put a lot of these resources into these new minerals that have been discovered so that the country is able to take benefit from the companies. So it's going to hold equity in these private companies so that it's not that the government itself will be doing mining projects, but it will invest the revenue that the Minerals Income Investment receives or is managing into new mining assets. And right now, there's a proposal to invest about $30 million from the Minerals Income Investment Fund into the Atlantis lithium project, so that in the end, Ghana is positioning itself to actually be a beneficiary of the income that is going to be derived from that project. It's not going to be like the other minerals where it is really not putting in anything and it's just relying on the carried interest, 10% carried interest that the law provides for it. So with this, hopefully, we are positioning ourselves to be able to make more from the resource. Also, the government is trying to provide policies and guidance that sets up industries that will be able to use these new minerals in the whole value chain, so that we are not really exporting raw materials, but we are setting up industries that will be able to process and use some of these resources in order to help us benefit a lot more than we are currently doing from the other minerals that we've explored over the past 100 years.
Thank you, Ghana. Then the next topic is fantastic.
Yeah, just from a South African point of view, also we don't have specific legislation dealing with these, let's call them battery minerals or new minerals that we're talking about. They're also regulated generally under the what's called the MPRDA, the Petroleum Resources Development Act, just as much as gold mining or platinum mining or coal mining. But we have seen quite a few new projects that are starting up. In Northern Natal, there's a major lithium project which is being discovered, and I'm embroiled for my sins in a massive dispute where there are 3 competing applicants for the same rights. So that's keeping me awake at night, just dealing with that. But it just shows you that there's great interest in lithium in South Africa, and we do have deposits. In regard to rare earths, there are 2 projects in South Africa which the current owners are trying to get up and running for rare earths. It's tantalum and all of these weird, wonderful minerals that I know nothing about, but these are these rare earth minerals, and we've got some of the biggest deposits in the world outside of China. The 2 problems with the deposits, the one is that very far from infrastructure, so it's very expensive to get the product to port. They're both in the Northern Cape, so you'd have to get it down to the Saldanha port. The one issue is the lack of infrastructure around the project areas. The other one is nuclear radiation, which seems to be present in some of these rare earth deposits. I think there's thorium in these deposits, which is highly nuclear radioactive, and one needs to deal with how to dispose of the waste, and one has to deal with very onerous legislation in South Africa dealing with nuclear radiation. So as I said, we've got no specific legislation, but there's quite a bit of interest in these new minerals.
Thank you, Chris. Then we'll move on to the next topic, which is mineral beneficiation. It's quite a big topic. I will pose 3 questions to all 5 countries. So the first question is, what are your views on beneficiation as a means to grow the economies of developing African countries? Please give an indication of how your jurisdiction has addressed and responded to the issue of beneficiation. What are the challenges faced by your country in establishing and creating a successful beneficiation industry? And lastly, are there any government policies which have been published regarding mineral beneficiation? If so, please explain them. We will start with Tanzania.
Thank you. I will start with the first question on my views on beneficiation as a means to grow economies of developing African countries. I think this is well known that African countries have been exporting raw materials and importing finished goods. So now, in view of having a beneficiation policy and having a beneficiation facilities to export refined minerals, would change this paradigm of exporting raw materials or raw minerals and then importing finished goods. So it's a very good thing. As we know, beneficiation adds value to the minerals before they are exported or before they are used for domestic use or domestic market. And this follows the various studies that have confirmed this one, that, okay, beneficiation adds value to the minerals even more than 50%. So this now would not only generate revenue for the countries, but also other benefits in terms of employment opportunities, in terms of technology transfer, etc., etc. We'll use Botswana as an example. We all know Botswana is one of the leading African countries that have been able to benefit from the diamond sector. For example, one of the studies that I noted that diamonds beneficiation or processing in Botswana has enabled Botswana to create or maybe to address high rate of unemployment by creating more than 3,000 jobs. And this is now one of the largest manufacturing subsector in Botswana. So in my thinking, beneficiation stands to benefit African countries to grow their economies and maybe diversify a mining sector with other sectors. Specifically to Tanzania, indication on how my jurisdiction has addressed or responded to the issue of beneficiation. We can go back to 2017 when we reformed our mining sector. The reforms which I may call revolutionary in nature, where now the mining sector contains provisions which restrict exportation of raw minerals. And it goes further. Under the Mineral Wealth and Resources Permanent Sovereignty Act, where the law says even all agreements relating to extraction, exportation, exploration of natural resources should provide commitments for establishment of beneficiation facilities in the country. And the exportation of raw minerals has been strictly restricted. This is an indication that Tanzania is moving towards having beneficiation of minerals within the country. And this follows the challenge that we have seen, like, for example, Tanzanite, again, stone mined in Tanzania, in the world, has not been able to benefit the country because of low processing standards. And you know, the value at the price goes up as processing standards go up. And the other challenge that Tanzania has been facing is, despite having all these provisions, the law, etc., there has been a reluctance of these mining companies to establish beneficiation plants in the country. Of course, there are prospects that some of the Chinese companies and the other companies from abroad to establish smelting and refinery plants, but not so many companies have been licensed by the Mining Commission to conduct beneficiation activities in the country. In terms of policies and laws, the mineral policy of Tanzania of 2009 provides for beneficiation of minerals in the country. The government is committing itself to supporting the private sector, but also to collaborating with regional and international organizations in having in-country beneficiation of raw minerals. So the policy which informs the law at least set the standard and objective of having minerals beneficiated within the country. Now, having the Mining Act itself, as I have said a few minutes ago, in 2017, we all know what happened in Tanzania, where there was a total ban of exportation of mineral concentrates. And now all these agreements were put aside to have all mineral agreements or mine development agreements being renegotiated with the government to have all these mineral concentrates refined here in Tanzania. So other than that, these laws were reformed. Some of the new legislation were enacted, but also the Mining Act, which is the main mineral law in governing in Tanzania, was amended to put a total restriction or ban of exportation of raw minerals. But also, very interesting, there is another provision which says where exportation of raw minerals is permitted, those who export raw minerals will not receive benefits that are given to people or companies that promote Tanzanian products in the external markets. So this indicates that there are circumstances where raw minerals may be exported. And as a result, in 2018, the Minister for Minerals promulgated the Mining Value Addition Regulations and Mining Beneficiation Regulations. Now, beneficiation regulations regulate the licensing procedures and types of licenses that are allowed. But now the Mining Value Addition Regulations now put some sort of limitations to what extent, for example, gold doré or silver doré can be exported. For example, maybe minerals can be exported up to 20% some beneficiation within the country, or maybe 60% after. That means to a certain extent, minerals may be exported without being beneficiated 100%. So in my view, maybe this takes care of the prevailing circumstances that we don't have industry, we don't have beneficiation facilities in the country. So you put a ban in the law, a total restriction, and perhaps no one is interested in establishing beneficiation facilities maybe within 1 year or two. What do you do? Given that you have the agreement with change of law clauses, et cetera, et cetera. So despite all these challenges, despite allowing certain minerals to be exported without 100% beneficiation, but I think Tanzania, we have put ourselves in a better position towards changing this pattern of having all minerals exported in raw state or in rough state. So I think this is a good indication for the future in case of Tanzania, that we are heading towards a state where we'll be beneficiating of minerals here in the country, provided we invest in establishing beneficiation facilities, but also we create enabling environment for more investors to come and establish beneficiation facilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tanzania. Next up is DRC.
Well, thank you. Let me go back to the previous set of questions regarding the minerals of the future, please. That's very important for the DRC. DRC is trying to position itself. I mean, as you know, DRC has most of those minerals, if not all. DRC is generally characterized as a geological scandal because of that. So lithium, coltan, cobalt, etc. DRC has most of them. And DRC is trying to position itself as a key player as regards those those minerals of the future. The government has been taking a few initiatives, first in the law, in the mining code, and then a decree has been signed. Certain minerals, especially the cobalt and coltan and uranium, I think, have been declared as strategic minerals. So the concept of strategic minerals have been introduced in the DRC mining code, where the government may at any time, because of a strategic position of a particular mineral in the global market, declare such mineral as a strategic one, having the most important consequence being the increase on the royalties percentage being paid. So that's number one of the initiatives the government have been taking. The other one is they've been taking some strategies like developing a battery supply chain. They call it the Battery Chain Initiative. A body has been set in place by the president to work on developing a local solutions for the DRC to become a producer, not only of minerals, but of the batteries. There's another initiative that has been taken as regard to artisanal cobalt, because the government considers that there's a big quantity of cobalt being produced by artisanal miners, and they are being organized. The initiative is done with a state-owned company called JECA Mines. They have set up a corporation, dedicated corporation for this project, where they have organized a local market where the artisanal producers sell to that corporation and then export. So there is an initiative also regarding artisanal cobalt. And the government is trying to position itself globally as a key player. When the president is saying all the time that DRC is a solution country, what he means is that he's telling to the global community, look, we have what you need for environment issues because of our forests, but we also have what you need for your transition to the technologies of the futures, because we have those minerals. So we have both aspects that you need for the future. And they want to become a key player. The strategy is to develop local industry, local transformation industry, so that DRC can fight to have a stake in the global market of the supply of commodities directly, which would come from the mineral industry. So they're trying to, they have been reaching out to Tesla, Samsung, and other global consumers of cobalt to tell them, come and buy directly to us, come and develop a local industry to produce what you need locally, like batteries, etc. So that's what's happening as far as technologies of the future are concerned. As for the beneficiation, the mining code has restricted exportation of concentrate of the ores. So there's an obligation to process minerals locally. There are challenges because we don't have the technology and businesses specializing in processing and transformation are slow to come, but licenses are available. The government, some licenses have been issued for processing companies. The strategy is to have at least the processing done locally and then aim at achieving transformation also locally. So it's both in the law and in the government policy to obtain local beneficiation of the minerals and not allow exportation of concentrate.
Very interesting. Thank you for that, Patty. Then we'll hand over to Zambia.
Thank you, Ati, and thank you to the previous speakers. I think they have articulated the thesis generally behind beneficiation, and that is to add value to the finished product. So I'll probably just go straight into the challenges, because Zambia has walked the journey before, the beneficiation journey. I think we have a 55-year history in trying to achieve that, and learning some lessons in the process. So back in 1968, the government set up a fabrication company for copper, known as Zambia Metal Fabricators. And the whole idea behind it was just to make sure that of the copper that is exported from Zambia, a good portion of it should be fabricated into finished products, so that the exports are more valuable. But unfortunately, things haven't turned out that way. And a study done by the World Bank on Zamefa itself in 2011 is quite revealing in terms of how this approach towards beneficiation by African countries, should be taken. So 5 things were identified by that study. I think these are drivers that would either kill or build beneficiation initiative. So first is access to market. Second is access to raw materials. Third is access to capital to finance plant and equipment. Fourthly is access to skilled labor and technology. And lastly, profitability. So what was discovered in the case of Zambia was that, first of all, access to market was a big challenge. Unlike, raw copper that is exported and where it's going, in terms of finished products, there were a lot of variables there and dynamics, in the sense that beneficiation makes sense when it's closer to the market, or it's established where the market is. So most investors in this space would look for a jurisdiction where the market that consumes the finished product is, rather than follow where the supply is. So that was one thing that was established. The other thing that was established was that if you are in an environment of oversupply of a particular metal, the mined metal won't be as attractive to fabricators. So they would rather go for scrap because it's easier and there's an oversupply. And we discovered that challenge in Zambia. Then, of course, the access to capital is an easier question or issue to deal with. Capital is cheaper outside Africa than, getting it within Africa, generally speaking. And in terms of skilled labor and technology as well, the investors in this space would like to establish where these are easily available. You don't have to import spare parts. You don't have to import skill in order to repair the plant. And technology is evolving every time. So the pace of development of technology may not be as fast in our jurisdictions. And of course, there's a profitability issue as well. as an input industry, that consumes the raw material. So the beneficiation is dictated by the price of the copper or the cobalt or whatever it is at a particular time. So those were the findings, and I think those are the challenges that ZAMEFA has faced in Zambia. So what is the country doing? I think, and I think Pathy can confirm this as well. What Zambia and DRC have done in order to overcome those challenges is to work together and actually create an industry that will consume the finished product. So back in April, I think 2022, the two countries signed an agreement to create this value chain, between the two countries in terms of how the copper and the cobalt produced within the region, which is, in the order of 95% for the continent. How that will be, in terms of creation of value, how that will be achieved at each stage of the value chain. And the United States has also, sort of acceded to that agreement between the two countries and is willing to provide support, both technical and financial. And an MOU, a tripartite MOU, was signed in December last year. But perhaps more critical is that a few days ago, the two countries signed a funding agreement with Afrexim and an arm of the United Nations for economic development for Africa. And this is to fund a pre-feasibility study to establish how special economic zones can be established across the two countries in a collaborative way in order to create this market, so that, the countries are not dependent so much on the export market, but even the local market. And this will provide stability, to the demand for whatever the two countries are producing. And I think this is a space that we are watching. And I think it's also an opportunity for those who are invested in the battery minerals, especially, to look to and see how they can participate, because it's a more collaborative effort. And I suspect it to be more successful than what we have attempted to achieve domestically, just as one country. So it looks like it's something that will require a regional effort. And it's not perhaps just about the DRC and Zambia. I suspect it's something that will be replicated in the rest of Africa, where most of these minerals are. So that's what I wanted to share on the journey. But I also want to share that in Zambia, we don't have specific legislation, although we do have incentives in terms of value addition to primary products like copper. So for example, somebody who produces finished product out of raw copper is taxed at half the normal tax rate at 15% instead of the 30%. So we do have such kind of incentives, but I suspect the more important effort now is being placed on both a bilateral and regional level for it to make sense as a beneficiation industry. So I'll end there for now. Thanks.
Thank you, Charles. Pathy, I don't know if you want to add anything, the DRC's perspective.
No, not for the moment. Maybe if there are questions.
Thank you. Sarah, please would you give us the Ghana perspective?
So in Ghana, we actually do not have a beneficiation industry yet. But over the past few years, the government has been trying to push the development of refineries and industries to be able to improve the raw minerals that is won in the country. And as part of that policy, 2 mineral refineries have been set up, one by Eurojet, which is an Egyptian company, and it's called the Gold Coast Refinery. It's supposed to be one of the first and biggest refineries in West Africa. And then we also have the Royal Gold Refinery, which has been set up in association with an Indian company and the Precious Mineral Company, which is a government agency. And they are all hoping that with the setup of these industries, the country will stop exporting raw mineral resources and will refine some of these minerals before they are exported. However, there is hesitation with the large mineral and mining companies to use these refineries because of issues of ESG and corporate governance reporting and their ability to sell their minerals on the international market. Since these refineries do not have the international certification standards that they need to for their standards to be able to process their minerals. But the government is asked these companies to get ready because it's going to exercise its right to be able to ask for certain portions of minerals to be refined in the country. It hasn't done that yet, but it's given them the notification that it will go ahead and do that. So what these companies are also trying to do, they are trying to conduct due diligence on these new refineries, ensure that they would meet the standards that they require, and that if they use them, they will be able to still sell their products on the international market. Also, the government has passed the Ghana Integrated Aluminium Development Corporation Act. So basically, the thought behind this law is to establish a bauxite industry around the whole value chain, not just mining, but setting up refining of bauxite and setting up downstream industries that will be able to use these products so that the whole value chain is available in country, and also they would get international companies that would be able to use this product, and all that to solve the problem that Charles just talked about. So the law is kind of looking at the whole value chain before the industry starts. But although they've set up the law, they are looking at joint ventures with international companies, but nothing has come of yet. And we already have VALCO, which was set up in the 60s to help with refining of alumini and aluminium. Unfortunately, VALCO hasn't really lived to its expectation after it was handed over to government. It was initially owned by Kaiser, and they were relying a lot on the power from our hydro plants to be able to produce and export. But due to the shortage of power, previously, they had issues with getting low-cost power, so they left and handed over the company to government. Right now, a lot of we don't have the power issues that we have, but VALCO needs retooling. So there's a project right now to retool VALCO, and they're inviting investors to invest in VALCO and make sure that it would be suitable for the purpose of the act and develop the bauxite and alumni industry that they need to develop. They've also set up the Ghana, they've also passed the Ghana Integrated Iron and Steel Development Act, which is looking at setting up a whole iron and steel industry. Again, they're looking at the whole value chain, mining, processing of minerals, and then setting up downstream industries so that we are able to use the product in country and we are not only relying on export. And even if we are going to export, we are exporting refined product so that we are getting value for that.
Thank you, Siriam. We've also received a question from Matt. Matt writes, for the various mineral in abundance in Africa, and especially the so-called future minerals, how can the different countries work together and negotiate as groupings for FDI to establish process factories that can be utilized at a regional level? I'm posing this question to the panel. Please may we answer, Matt?
I don't know if I can go first, Ati, and I think that's a good question, and it's topical in the sense that that is what Zambia and DRC are trying to do in relation to their copper and cobalt endowment, because it doesn't make sense, for Zambia to establish a processing plant, for finished products when DRC is exporting the primary product directly into the market, and it's exporting to industries that have been in existence for a long time. So there has to be a paradigm shift. And I think that's probably what is informing the two countries, that we have to work together in order to create the value chain, the special economic zones in the first place, create the market, create some level of control in terms of the market for the finished products. Because if you have a local industry that consumes part of what you produce, then that should help. And the local industry there doesn't just mean the domestic industry in that particular country, but either the regional market or the continent in the first place as the number one consumer of what you're producing. And then export comes after that. That way it makes much more sense to actually establish a beneficiation industry, because there's a certain level of control you have over the market. But if the reliance is just on the export, the dictates of the international market make it very difficult for you to really analyze how profitable or how the returns are going to look like if you do establish such kind of a plant in Africa. So it definitely makes a lot of sense. And for Zamefa, the one I've mentioned, it's not until it established a regional market, within the SADC region and the rest of Africa, that, the business case started to make sense. When the business case was just export or local consumption, that particular industry struggled, to actually find itself as a competitive producer. So the question is definitely very pertinent, and I think we have platforms as Africa where we can start to build or put in the foundation for a regional framework for the beneficiation of what Africa is endowed with. Thank you, Ati.
Thank you, Charles. I see Hendrix is typing another question. Or Hendrix, would you like to just unmute and ask the panel the question?
Okay, well, let's go.
I see it's just good morning. Good morning to you too, Hendrix. So we'll move on.
Well, maybe I'll just say something about South Africa quickly. I've got to take 1 minute. We've got once again quite sophisticated legislation dealing with beneficiation of what we always considered to be the most important lucrative minerals in South Africa. So we've got the Precious Metals Act, which regulates exporting inter alia, the export of unwrought precious metals, being gold, silver, and platinum group metals. So you need an export permit. But in South Africa, I think everybody knows that the 3 biggest refineries in the world for platinum are in South Africa. So that's not really an issue from the platinum point of view, platinum group metals. And also in South Africa, in terms of gold, we've got the Rand refinery, which is always refined most of South Africa's gold. And then we got diamonds legislation. The Diamonds Act also regulates the export of unpolished and uncut diamonds. And you have to offer a certain percentage of your production to local beneficiators. So we're quite strictly regulated in terms of diamonds, in terms of this specific piece of legislation. There's no real legislation relating to any other type of minerals. There is provision in our MPRDA amendment bill, which is, went through Parliament in 2013, but still hasn't been enacted, and that contains a whole mineral beneficiation section, which is also designed to deal with strategic minerals and the restriction on position of conditions related to beneficiation in South Africa related to those minerals. But at the moment, there's no such restriction. There was talk about placing a ban on the export of ferrochrome without an export permit, chrome deposits, because most of our stuff ends up in China. We're the biggest chrome producer in the world. So, but that legislation, as far as I'm aware, has not yet been enacted, but it's being spoken about. So that's the South African situation. All right, Oti, do you want to carry on with the legal mining?
Yes, absolutely. So we'll move on to the last topic, which Chris touched on earlier, and which the other countries also briefly mentioned in the responses, which is this question of illegal mining. We'll start with Martin. Please would you just take us through this challenge of illegal mining and how your jurisdiction is dealing with this issue.
Thank you, Ati. We have a lot of issues with illegal mining, and we have also some type of exploitation which are now became illegal also on for the government. We have the gold panning first, which is let's say a traditional way to exploit gold in our country. But we see that we have a lot of issues with the gold panners because sometimes you have illegal occupation of mining sites, which came with a lot of issues with the owner of the said titles, of the mining titles, especially international companies. You have a special unit at the level of the Minister of Mines. That unit is there in order to help the mining companies to deal with these issues, because the problem with the illegal mining is the fact that most of the time it's done by the local communities around the mining sites. So it may lead sometimes with a lot of issues in the area. So of course the mining companies cannot themselves build an army or protect themselves. So it should be they should look for a good leverage from the government, but also for their ESG project also in the area to mitigate the risk and lower the illegal occupation of their mining sites. On some other topic also is the dredging, the fact that some mining companies, we used to have some mining industries working on the rivers and exploiting the gold from the river. That way of exploitation has been banned from the mining code, but still we can see that a lot of people are still continuing to dredge and to do illegal mining on the rivers, which cause a lot of issues, environmental issues. So it's an ongoing issue, unfortunately, due to also the poverty in our countries. So it's really difficult sometimes really to have a good management, because sometimes the population won't really understand that the government is coming to stop them from looking for resources.
Thank you for that, Marley. And before we move on to the next country, South Africa has also grappled with this issue of illegal mining. And in fact, there's a document that was released by the Department of Mineral Resources that estimated that the country loses about 70 billion or has lost 70 billion, just in the gold industry alone due to illegal mining. So it's a huge issue. And also last year, the country published a policy. It's called the Small Scale Mining and Artisanal Mining Policy to deal with this issue of illegal mining. And the next country, has actually informed South Africa's policy formulation around this issue of illegal mining. So we'll head over to Tanzania because, South Africa has looked quite closely at the legal developments in Tanzania to inform its strategy and its policy to deal with this issue of illegal mining. So over to you, Tanzania.
Thank you. I've heard from the previous speaker, illegal mining in connection with smuggling of minerals have been trending in Tanzania, especially before the 2017 reforms, even after. And this triggered, among other things, the passing of the then 2017 legislation. And following that one, but also the government promulgated the regulations, which we call mining, mineral game, and house regulations, where now any person should trade except special mining license holders and mining license holder, all other persons, including primary mining license holders, to trade their minerals within the mineral game and houses. And where there is no mineral game and house, the government will establish a buying station in any of that area for purposes of these persons to trade their minerals. And the regulations require any person other than a person holding a mineral right, this is what we call maybe any person without a license, may Sana mining, to trade their minerals in such areas. And these are required to declare before the mining commission official that these are the minerals obtained in whatever the activities or whatever the site, declare such minerals to that mining commission and be able to pay the required royalties before these are supplied to the dealer's license holder or broker's license holder. So these are the available efforts that Tanzania is taking to make sure illegal mining and smuggling of minerals is curbed. Thank you.
Thank you. We've also now received a question from Hendrix. Good morning, Hendrix. So his question is, the Zambia-Congo MOU, is it only a government-to-government MOU, or it has private sector involvement as well?
Yeah, thank you, Ati, and Chris, and thank you, Hendrix, for that good question. Yes, it's currently at a bilateral level, but the objective of the MOU is actually to establish the first building block towards the creation of a framework, and that framework is going to allow for private sector participation, because the whole of this initiative will be private sector driven. But what the two governments are doing is to de-risk sovereign risk, so to speak, and create a common framework between the two countries, and that creates predictability in terms of what you're going to expect from each of the two countries. And then out of that is likely to be born a more refined treaty, more specific treaty, and perhaps legislation from each side of the borders that mirrors what you find on the other side, just to create a very predictable framework. But of course, the framework is one thing, and I think that's the reason why the pre-feasibility study has to be done. Other aspects need to be established in terms of what market can be there, what would be the channels for exporting, what would be the channels in terms of attracting skill, technology transfer. All those things have to be done before the countries move to the next step. So I hope that addresses your question, Hendricks.
Thank you, Charles. So on 9 March 2018, the DRC promulgated its new mining code. This is the 2018 mining code. The code aims to ensure increased local ownership and introduces a mandatory requirement of 10% of the shareholding in mining companies to be held by Congolese nationals. How has this mining code been implemented? And in particular, has implementation of these provisions been effective? What challenges have been encountered? This is directed at you, Patty.
Well, thank you. Yes, this requirement has been implemented. In addition to the mining code, it has been confirmed and elaborated in the mining regulation. What it says is basically that every mining license holder, and again, it does not apply to exploration license holders, only to mining license holders. In our terminology, we say exploitation license holder. So when you are an exploitation license holder, when the license is being issued, you need to confirm that you have reserved 10% of the share capital of the company to DRC nationals, which is individual persons. And this 10% is split into 5% for the company workers and 5% to other Congolese nationals who are interested and able of buying those shares. It's not given for free. It's been implemented. It's challenging because every time you are assisting a client, the question keeps coming, how do we do with that? Do we have to? The current legislation currently has not yet specified what sanctions or the obligation is to prove that you have reserved. And reservation means you need to sell to a person who is interested, but it's not yet clear what are the terms and conditions. How do you organize the acquisition process? Do you have the right to refuse the first comer, etc. So it's not yet very elaborate, so it's very challenging, but the obligation must be complied with. So we have not yet seen it as deterring projects because most of the cases in which we were involved, people have managed to comply with. But the need is currently to have this legislation clarified so that all the outstanding questions around that requirement be clarified so that one is comfortable when dealing with it. And this is still to come. But it's already applicable and companies are organizing to comply with that.
Thank you very much for that response, Patty.
If you allow me.
Oh, sorry.
A quick comment on Zambia, DRC, and working together question. I totally agree and confirm what Charles has said. For the DRC, that's a big question also, because DRC has a big deficit of infrastructure. So producers in DRC have to find ways to export, and some go via Angola, some go via Zambia, and the mining resources are also considered as deeply connected with the insecurity in the East. So initiatives have been taken, although with difficulties, but the idea was to work with all the neighbors so that the working together structure could contribute to reducing or solving the insecurity challenges in the East and improving exploitation capability and coordination with the other jurisdictions. So something is going on with Zambia, as Charles said. Something was going on with Rwanda, but it had been, it's like on hold because of the relationships between DRC and Zambia has deteriorated. So it has had a negative impact on the efforts that were going on. With Angola, efforts were also on the way, especially for the corridor of what is called Lobito, because they have a railway connecting to the DRC and to the Katanga region, which makes it easier for miners in that area to export using Angolan ports. So the working together is definitely a must for the countries in the region. Initiatives are existing. I understand that policies were being harmonized at SADC level, at the COMESA level as well, where DRC is member. But the most advanced one currently is with Zambia, and which Charles was talking about.
Thank you, Pat. You know, we are always very grateful for participation, especially from our audience. We have 2 questions for Tanzania and as well as the DRC. The first question is from Matt. Matt says, for illegal mining activities, they are mostly triggered by having availability of a black market for minerals involved. The approach Tanzania is tabling of having formalized marketing arrangements may help. What else can be done to curtail these illegal activities? Over to you, Tanzania.
Thank you. I think given that these regulations are new, which are trying to formalize the artisanal mining sector, and not all regions or areas have these mining commission officials. Maybe increasing the officials in these areas may be a first step to assist. But also, there has been an issue that maybe not all persons who are willing to declare their minerals before the buying stations or mineral game houses. Perhaps these brokers and dealers, license holders may meet them somewhere, somehow, and be able to buy the minerals without royalties being paid, or maybe trying also to smuggle, to export the minerals without the required permits. So maybe the other efforts that may be put in place may include all those efforts that are put into place by the country to avoid illegal exportation of any product from Tanzania. So all these efforts, general efforts, may also be part of the mining sector to make sure these do not export minerals without declaring them before the mining commission officials. So we stand to see how these regulations will be implemented to make sure the objectives for which they established is realized.
Thank you very much for that response, Theo. The next question is from Peter. Peter says, good morning. Regarding the DRC shareholdings, would these include Congolese residents versus Congolese citizens?
It's not about Congolese residents, and it's about Congolese citizens. I mean, a person holding Congolese nationality, which is exclusive of other nationality. And I'm happy for that, because those questions keep coming. Congolese residents are not considered as meeting the requirement for that mining code requirement. By Congolese resident, I understand a national of another country, but being resident in the DRC. They are not considered as part of compliance. Compliance is when you include citizens of the DRC.
Thank you, Patty. And in fact, if I recall, the 2018 mining code specifically mentions Congolese nationals. So it includes a definition of who would be considered to be a Congolese national. But thank you very much for that response. Then the last question, perhaps to end on a positive note, is for Zambia. So we've seen recent media reports which hail Zambia as the next investment destination following the election of the new government. In your experience, what opportunities are available to investors in the country's mining industry?
Yeah, thank you, Ati. A good question indeed. So I think Zambia has been generally open for business, and what has been a challenge, perhaps I would say, has been the policy implementation. So if you look at our mining code, it's been progressively improved and benchmarked international standard and best mining practices. So progressively, I think we're getting better in terms of legislation and policy framework. But I think there's been 3 challenges, if I can itemize them. First one has been the actual administration of the policy. Secondly, stability in terms of fiscal policy in the mining space. And then lastly, what I would call the relationship between government and private sector. So the first one remains a challenge. I think it's work in progress. And the main issue there has been speculators holding onto ground and waiting for the right time, and somehow they'll continue holding on to exploration licenses. But this new government is definitely doing something to unlock that and offer these opportunities to new players, because a lot of ground has been locked up for a long time, and that needs to change. And one of the changes that this new government is introducing is just bringing in professionalism in terms of administration. And like I mentioned, the Act or the Mining Code has always been progressive. There's little interference from politicians or minimum interference. And the code is run by technocrats who actually understand the business. But that has also meant that some people can take advantage of the situation, and the new government has definitely stepped in. We've seen a lot of effort to try and unlock the mining tenements. Then secondly, the fiscal space for mining companies has been a painful process in the last I would say maybe 20 years, but I think again in the last 5 to 7 years we've seen a lot of stability there, especially in the last 5 years, where no new taxes generally been introduced, but there were certain aspects of tax policy that were contentious, like the deductibility of mineral royalty against corporation tax, as well as the payment of VAT refunds, because most of the producers or the mining companies produce to export, and exports are zero rated. So when they're claiming back their refunds for VAT, that was a challenge for the country. But the new government again has stepped in, and swiftly so, to correct those 2 issues. Perhaps the third issue, and which is probably underrated but is quite significant, was the relationship between the government and the mining companies. And what we have now with the new government is a government that is business friendly. And the extent to which this government goes in order to promote investment in the mining sector is very admirable, because they don't only rely on the facilitation based on the policy framework, but we've seen the government going out of its way to make sure that projects are actually taking place. Platforms are established between government and the mining sector to continue discussing. And already within a short space of time, I think they've been there just for 2 years. We've seen 2 major projects already on the cards. So there is a Nico project where the government has made sure that all the showstoppers, all the challenges that the investor is facing are addressed. And we do have a project that is likely to start producing by next year. and is built to be the largest nickel mine in Africa. Then we have the existing, nearly all the existing players in the market are talking of expansion, not only because there's a demand for what they produce, but the policy framework is now working. The policy framework that has been in existence is now being properly implemented because the government is business friendly. So we are seeing even the existing players like First Quantum, Barrick, thinking of doing something more than what they're doing already. But of course, we have new players now, and those new players are facilitated by government. So immediately they show an interest in Zambia. They are knocking at the Zambian door. The government is ready to ask them what they need in order to invest. So it's a total change in approach. And I must say, it's already showing dividends in terms of delivering the objectives of the government, to use mining as the accelerator for growth of the Zambian economy. And out of that, the government wants to see other sectors, the economy develop. So, for example, the government has a target of 3 million tons of copper production in a few years from now. I mean, what that means also is that we need to establish new infrastructure as a country. We need to have more energy supply, in order to produce this increased capacity. We're talking of more jobs, more skills required, and feeding on to other sectors of the economy. So from that perspective, I can definitely confirm that we have an environment in Zambia where the government and the business sector or the private sector are speaking the same language. And that is largely because we have a president that comes from the private sector or the business sector.
Thank you very much for that, Charles. Chris, I'm not going to give that to you.
Okay, thanks very much. I think we've run out of time, unfortunately. It's been, we've cut short some of the questions, unfortunately, but I think nevertheless, we've covered most things that we wanted to. I think it's been very informative, and you've heard from some of the best mining law experts in their particular jurisdictions, and their thoughts have been very valuable and insightful, and I hope you've learned a lot. I think it was nice to end off with the Zambian story. I think a lot of countries in Africa can learn from the Zambian position, and I'm including South Africa in that. The standoff sort of between the DMRE and the mining industry is well known, and it would be far better if they cooperated and worked together to deal with all the issues that we face. And I think it's starting to turn. I think the government has started to realize that they need the private sector and vice versa. So we have a feeling that things are turning, for example, in regard to rail infrastructure. They're studying, the government has realized they may have to privatize certain lines in order to get the minerals down to port, for example, and things like that. So it's good to hear about the Zambian situation. As I said, sorry, I probably was a slightly remiss in not introducing all the speakers personally, but I think all the names are on the invite that you all would have received. And as I said, there is a website with all of the firms' details in the LEX Africa website. So to the extent that you need to get hold of any one of the specialists in that particular jurisdiction, you've got easy access to all the details on the website. So thank you very much. I think it was a very useful hour and a half. Thank you.
Thank you.